Troy, welcome to the show. How's it going?
Hello, nice to be on your show. I'm doing
Super
fine, thanks.
pleasure. I'm excited to have you here. I wanted to start off with nicotine.
Yeah,
And when people hear about nicotine and they hear about that word, the common correlation and what comes to mind is typically cigarettes, it's cancer, and a whole host
mhm.
of negative associations, right? What exactly is nicotine and why is it relevant in this context when it comes to long COVID?
Yeah. Well, first of all, nicotine is um, it's a natural substance that's part of cigarettes, but cigarettes have in total like 7,000 or 8,000 chemicals in them, of which I think 30 some of them are actually cause cancer. But nicotine doesn't cause cancer. It's not on any cancer causing lists as well. And also, a lot of times, nicotine is blamed as the part of cigarettes that makes it like addictive. But actually, nicotine by itself is not really addictive. The cigarette companies add in tons of other things to make it more addictive as well. So that's one of the biggest problems. And then on top of that, you have the cigarette industries uh, doing things to kind of muddy the waters in their benefit as well, which sometimes is false information in the wrong way for nicotine as well. So, I mean, if people understood the benefits of nicotine by itself, then there wouldn't be as many people who smoke,
Hmm.
if that makes any sense.
Hmm.
Because if you go through the data and they say, okay, this type of person, for example, if they're autistic, there's 80% chance that they're smokers. And if you look at people who are ADHD or something, and then it's like, oh, 60% chance that they're a smoker. And you realize throughout a lot of these different diseases that are kind of neurological in nature, that the smoking that they're doing is actually just kind of self medication in a lot of cases. And if they if they were to realize that they could get the same benefits just from a nicotine patch, a transdermal nicotine patch, where they're only getting nicotine and they're not having any of the addictive feelings, they're not having any of the side effects from smoking, etc., then they would stop smoking.
Hmm.
They would kind of maybe push through the difficult problems of smoking and then just continue on with the patch because they
Hmm.
realize that's the true benefit they were looking for.
Yeah,
So,
I think it is important to have this separation between nicotine, the substance itself,
yeah,
versus obviously cigarettes, which has tons of carcinogens. And I think there's an important distinction to be made there because I think when you do, even when I've spoken to friends about it, and you mentioned about nicotine, it's like, oh, okay, that causes cancer, right? But
yeah,
so in terms of actually nicotine in itself.
hmm,
Um, as a substance, it's not carcinogenic, right? And it's
yeah.
also not particularly addictive, or is there an addictive element that you need to be careful with there
No,
as
there's
well?
not. People confuse the meaning of addictive. They it's thrown around too much. People say, "Oh, I'm addicted to this. I'm addicted to that." But actually, the word addiction in a medical sense is like is something like for like maybe someone is taking heroin and they're willing to rob somebody or kill somebody to get money to get their next high or something, right? Or ruin their life for the drug because it takes priority over their life. So like people say that they're addicted to caffeine, but it's not really an addiction. Nobody's going around and with a gun and holding up people and saying, "Give me your coffee or die." Or, no, people,
You haven't seen me before my morning cappuccino.
I mean, people get used to certain things like coffee or nicotine, etc. And with and even with sugar. I'm sure you've seen like a lot of the YouTube videos of people who are on these like sugar diets, and they're like, I'm not going to eat sugar for a month, and they feel horrible for like 3 weeks, and then they start feeling much better. But I mean, the body gets used to certain stimulation, and the body's always looking for balance. So if you stimulate the body in any way, one way, then the body will automatically just put in chemicals to shift the balance. So if you take away the stimulant, then the balance will shift or kind of like pendulum swing the other way.
Hmm.
So I think that that concept of balance and how the pendulum will swing, I think is an important concept to understand. But it's in the end, it's just understanding the true definition of words like addiction
Hmm.
and withdrawal and stuff. So, and also, if the more somebody is benefiting from it, the more type of withdrawal effects they would have. So I noticed that people with nicotine test, that if they have a neurotypical atypical disease, like they have ADHD or something, and they start taking nicotine, and from day one they're like, "Wow, this is fantastic," because it's like really solving a problem that they have in their life. And then you take it away, and then from day one they're like, "Oh man, this sucks. I really want to have the nicotine back." But I'm like for me, the days when I take breaks, it's usually because I'll get to the end of a day and realize that, oh, I haven't been wearing the patch today, so I'll just have a break for a few days and then continue. So
Hmm.
it's not even like coffee per se, but also it depends on the person, I think.
Yeah, for sure, for
So
sure.
yeah,
So just to give the viewers a bit of context, obviously you're talking about here the nicotine test, and that's obviously going to be the subject of today's discussion. But I think a
yeah,
lot of people who have watched this, and I've certainly had many questions around the nicotine test, and I've talked about it a little bit, but essentially it was a kind of movement that sort of started. I certainly first saw it a lot on Twitter when people were talking about executing this nicotine test where they were utilizing nicotine patches in an attempt to
hmm,
reduce and solve some of their long COVID symptoms.
yeah,
And there's been a ton of self-reported data going around, and you guys over at the nicotine test have now kind of started to congregate that data and
yeah,
put it into a more formal place of recording so that it's it's
hmm,
it's more centralized.
yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about how the hypothesis around nicotine as a therapeutic agent for long COVID started,
Hmm.
and what exactly is the mechanism behind this proposed effect?
Okay. Well, the hypothesis was originally done by Dr. Litsky. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, because it's I guess maybe it's Litska or Leitska, but
I don't think I can
uh,
help there,
I
unfortunately.
just I just say Dr. Litsky.
Yeah.
So he his hypothesis was that um, the SARS virus was getting attached to nicotinic receptors that are throughout the body. Almost every type of cell in the body has nicotinic receptors. And the nicotinic receptors are part of the cholinergic system, which is the parasympathetic system, like the vagus nerve and all of that. So his idea was that um, the virus or viral debris or even just the spike was getting lodged in these nicotinic receptors and it's just getting stuck there. So it's blocking the receptors. So there's like a blockade going on, and then they would just get kind of stuck there for long term, for days or months or years or I don't know. But I mean, that's his hypothesis. And then acetylcholine, which is normally the part of the body that will attach to these nicotinic receptors, wasn't strong enough to dislodge these viral elements or viral debris or whatever. So, but nicotine has a 30 times more affinity to the nicotinic receptor than acetylcholine. So that means that it's so attracted to it, like a magnet,
Hmm.
that whatever else is there gets knocked out. So if you take nicotine, then it'll go into the receptor, knock out the viral debris, and then the viral debris gets shunted off into the bloodstream, and then your body, once it's in the bloodstream, your immune system detects it and gets rid of it. And so that's one reason why people might report Herx reaction. The most typical trajectory is that people will like feel like much better for a couple of days. Maybe they'll have side effects depending on how well their starting dose is, and then they'll have like a Herx reaction because the theory is that there's so much viral debris that's being pushed out into the bloodstream that the body reacts as if you're sick again
Hmm.
because it has to upregulate the defenses. So people will report saying, "Oh, I felt like I had COVID again for 2 days or 3 days."
So just to clarify, so this Herx type reaction that you're talking about is essentially a kind of sick-like reaction that
Yeah,
comes as a result of having this uh, dislodged debris in your bloodstream. Is that right?
yeah, yeah. So
Okay.
it's so that's I mean it's all hypothesis, it's all
Hmm.
theory right now. I mean
Yeah.
there's no hard proof of that happening.
Hmm.
Um, but that's I mean, is the original hypothesis from Dr. Litsky. And but since then, when I started doing this research, I was going through lots of different, looking at it from different angles to try to figure out, well, why is it having this effect and that effect? And for example, people who have MECFS that say that they don't have long COVID, they just have MECFS,
Hmm.
even for years and decades, that they're benefiting from the nicotine patch. So, so Dr. Letsky said something about maybe some other viruses are also having this type of effect on the nicotinic receptors. It's not only the SARS spike that would get stuck there, but other viruses. There's
Hmm.
other. And the SARS virus is like a cold virus that has existed for a long time. So there's
Yeah,
all
you've got
sorts of
lots of
different
different.
viruses that might be creating the same types of problems. But I also have a lot of other hypotheses of why of why it works.
Okay, so just to clarify, so the hypothesis then is that you have COVID and viral debris, or whether it's spike protein, is latching onto these nicotinic receptors,
Yeah,
and they're not able to be dislodged, and this is causing all sorts of kind of issues with the parasympathetic nervous system,
mm,
dysregulation, all of this kind of stuff. And then nicotine, because it has such a strong affinity to those receptors, is able to come in when consumed or put on the patch or whatever, and
yeah,
dislodge this viral debris and essentially free up that receptor so that it can work in a coherent fashion again. Right?
yeah,
Am I understanding that correctly?
yeah. And that's
Okay.
also one important point is that people say, well, if this is true, then I can just smoke or I can just chew nicotine gum or whatever. But uh, the part that they don't understand about the chemistry is that nicotine actually takes only a few seconds to get into your brain or into all around your body. And then once it attaches to a receptor, it's like acetylcholine, I think attaches for, I don't know, like 1/10 of a second or something,
Hmm.
milliseconds. And maybe like nicotine will attach for like 1 second to a receptor. It's which is a very short amount of time. So if somebody's smoking and then they'll get nicotine, they'll get like a big boost of nicotine, like 1 milligram in a couple minutes, and then they don't smoke again for 15 minutes or an hour or whatever. So they're not getting any more nicotine. So any of the viral debris will just kind of reattach.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
So
I thought it'd gone. I thought you said that when it gets detached, it goes out into the bloodstream, or
yeah,
and then is kind of disposed of, or does it need to be constantly being blocked from reattaching because there's other nicotine, and
I
then it
mean,
will eventually get swept away? Is that right?
yeah, but it's all just theory. But the idea is that if it's detached from one receptor, then maybe it might attach to another receptor.
Okay.
But if you're using the nicotine patch and you're getting a constant dose all the time, so there's constantly nicotine coming in,
Hmm.
so it's going to be more effective because it's blocking more receptors and clearing more receptors than um, than than any other type of treatment. You know.
Okay. Okay. And in terms of, I know you obviously mentioned MECFS, and again, like you said, it's all like hypothesis and the theory, but I think it's very interesting to have the brainstorms around it. So
Hmm.
with MECFS, for example, obviously that can be triggered seemingly by a variety of different agents, or whether it be stress or bacterial infections,
Hmm.
different viruses, mono, all of these kind of things. What would the hypothesis be there then if it was not a virus, say, for example, or if it was a traumatic incident, or a bacterial pathogen
Hmm.
within the gut? Would the hypothesis still be the same, or would it be that there is still a disruption to these nicotinic receptors, but that disruption, whatever reason that's happening, is causing an issue with the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic nervous system, as you had suggested previously? Because I think that's
Yeah.
quite a consistent thing that seems disrupted across long COVID and ME/CFS right across the board. A
Mhm.
disruption of the nervous system seems quite consistent.
Yeah. That's. I mean that aligns more with my personal hypothesis of what's going on. Um, I think that there's probably some truth to Dr. Litsky's original hypothesis, but I think that with this type of drug, which is actually a quite powerful drug, and it's affecting the body at a cellular level, um, that it's actually doing a lot of other things as well, not only the blockade of the receptors, but like I said before about having the pendulum, the
Yeah.
swing and balance of the system. So when people have MECFS or chronic fatigue or any of these types of diseases, I think it messes with that pendulum, and normally it ends up swinging towards a very sympathetic side, and then the body's compensating for that. So
Hmm.
that's why people like try to use vagal nerve stimulation and breathing exercises and all these other things to try to bring their nervous system back to the center. No, they're trying to balance it out
Yeah.
some way. So uh, because nicotine is a stimulant of the parasympathetic system, so it doesn't stimulate the sympathetic system; it stimulates the parasympathetic. So that's helping bring back the balance towards parasympathetic. And actually, one of the side effects that some people have is after a few weeks of using the nicotine, they'll start feeling really sleepy.
Hmm.
And I was just reading some research about how that also happens to people with Parkinson's disease when they're using dopaminic drugs that affect their dopamine system. And I think it's part of this pendulum of kind of swinging back and forth, and the body's looking for the right balance. And well, like before, maybe the body is creating this much dopamine, and now with the nicotine or whatever other substance, you need to create more dopamine, or you need to create this one of other thousands of other drugs and just find that balance. So I think that
Mm.
that's one of the main things. And also related to that, which people don't seem to understand, is that with nicotine patches, the nicotine goes through your skin into your bloodstream, goes all around your body, to your brain and to your organs and everything, and then it accumulates in your gut. So, like the levels of nicotine in the gut when you're using the nicotine are like 80 times higher than they are in the bloodstream. And also, I believe that the gut is actually part of the brain. If you look at research into the the nerves in the gut, there are 500,000 neurons in the gut, which
The
is
gut
as
brain
many
axis as well.
as in a whole dog's brain. That many neurons humans have in their gut.
Hmm.
And if you cut, when they do research on these poor mice, and they do certain things to see what's happening, and like usually at the end of these research trials on the vagus nerve, they actually cut the vagus nerve between the gut and the brain. And when that happens, the gut works perfectly fine. The gut continues working and producing what it's doing and stuff, but the brain just freaks out because it that actually the brain needs the gut so much that when it loses that connection, the brain just stops
Hmm.
functioning.
Yeah, I've seen a lot about this recently. The kind of gut brain connection, and I know a
Yeah.
lot of people. When it comes to diet and things like that, there's a huge correlation with how
Mhm.
those two different entities interact.
Yeah.
Um, I think there's a real big correlation there, and I
Mhm.
think there's a lot of yeah. Oh, what was I going to say about the? I really wanted to ask you something. I forgot. Ah, okay, that was it. Sorry, I had a complete brain blank. Um, I know you. So just there, you mentioned about nicotine acting as a stimulant to the parasympathetic nervous system, which I think will
Yeah.
surprise a lot of people because one of the most common side effects with nicotine is this kind of elevated heart rate and
Mhm.
feeling a little more alert and a little more awake, but also kind of that relaxing kind of feeling as well. So how does that work? Because you've obviously, it
Mhm.
feels almost a little bit like it's stimulating you, and as caffeine does, but then on the other
Yeah.
hand it also has this kind of subduing and relaxing effect. How do those two things interact?
I think is quite complicated, and it's been a while since I've read through that part of the
Mm.
science, so I wouldn't be able to give a very good summary. But there's a researcher from Vanderbilt University who's been studying nicotine for a few decades, and he summed it up as of saying that nicotine acts as kind of putting on the accelerator, but also putting on the brakes at the same time.
Okay.
So it kind of uh, when you get the right balance with the parasympathetic system, then you don't have as many problems going on with everything else. I think
Hmm.
it's when you just find that right balance in everything, because it helps balance. Nicotine helps balance the immune system. It helps balance the parasympathetic system. It helps balance NAD production in the brain. It affects so many different things like that it has a broader effect. But you can't compare it to caffeine because you get with caffeine you're just getting a stimulant. And
Yeah.
actually, um, one of the things I'm preparing a video on this topic is I found this article showing that the tobacco companies in the past they wanted to make nicotine sound good. So they're like, okay, well, nicotine is just like caffeine. So it was actually the tobacco companies like trying to connect this whole caffeine and nicotine thing. It's like, oh, they're the same thing, but actually they're not the same thing. They don't actually work the same way in the body. And even when people are using nicotine, they tend to want to drink more coffee because it actually reduces the effect of the caffeine slightly.
Okay, okay.
So it kind of it's nicotine in a way is a modulator than more than a stimulant per se.
Okay,
Yeah.
interesting. So we've talked a little bit about the hypothesis. So obviously the varying hypothesis of nicotine dislodging and the viral debris, or also helping and assisting with
Mhm.
this parasympathetic nervous system to be stimulated, and these different varieties as to why it might be helping. So obviously, you guys at the nicotine test have put together
Mhm.
a kind of protocol that's been going around that people have been using themselves and been trying at
Mhm.
home to try and see if it alleviates symptoms. And there's been quite a few results that have been quite promising, and I've definitely
Yeah.
seen a lot of people. I tried it myself as well and had some. I definitely think it gave me more energy and improvement in certain symptoms. So I'd love if you could give a little breakdown of what exactly the protocol involves and the
Mhm.
rationale behind it throughout the whole duration of that course.
Yeah. Well, the protocol started because the original hypothesis from Dr. Litsky, he tried it on 4 people, and those 4 people took 7 milligrams for a week. But 3 of those 4 people hadn't had long COVID for very long,
Yeah,
like it had only been for a month or something. So that's not, really long COVID per se
yeah,
for most of them. I think the longest one was 10 months of long COVID. Um, so it had only been tried on 4 people. And then, like, when I started this research, it was because on the internet, you have all these people on Twitter saying, "Oh, has anybody tried this? And what was your reaction?" And then they got feedback from 1 or 2 people. And then I was like, well, why don't we just collect the data from a lot more people and then figure out what really works and what doesn't work? Um, so now I kind of got lost now. I forgot the question.
no, no. So are we just going through the protocol that's
Yeah.
actually involved?
Oh,
But I
okay.
think it's a really good point
Okay.
about collecting and centralizing that data, because there is actually a lot of
Yeah.
stuff out there and a lot of people want to be involved and want to
Yeah.
find out how things are and different treatments are affecting people. But if you're
Yeah.
just hearing an N of one or N of two, it doesn't necessarily give you that weight to be like, okay, this is definitely worth me putting in the time, energy, and effort to try
Yeah.
things. And if you have that centralized data like you guys are doing, then it provides
Hmm.
a little bit more weight to
Yeah.
any protocol that people are hoping to try. What
Hmm.
phenotypes of long COVID or ME/CFS might be benefited from it, and it gives
Yeah.
people a much stronger intuition before going into the treatment.
Hmm. So the first protocol started because when I was researching it, I would go onto these different forums to see what type of feedback people were having, and like some people were like, "Oh, it's fantastic," and then they would say, "But I tried it for a week and then it was fantastic, but then I haven't really changed much." And then some other people would try it, and then after a day, just be like really sick and just like, "Wow, this is horrible," and I'm gonna give up. And I figured out that the biggest problem was that people weren't adapting the dose to themselves, and they weren't adapting the treatment to long COVID, and that they probably needed more than a week. They needed 2 weeks or 2 months or however long to get the benefits. So I switched the so I started telling people, okay, we'll start with 3.5 milligrams instead of 7 milligrams,
And this is per
and
day. This is per day in the form of a
yeah,
patch, right?
yeah, in form of the patch.
Yeah.
So, and then trying to get people to start at lower doses and then to try it for longer periods of time, and to try to explain some of the different science behind it as well. Because whenever I try something, I'm always researching like crazy. So, but also I understand that lots of people with brain fog and stuff, they don't have the time and energy to read through 100 papers and and stuff. So I was trying to collate all of this research and try to give that information to people. And also, when I was starting to get the first data, I could also like very quickly be able to tell people, "Oh, wait, no, don't do this because that's a bad idea." Um, because over time, with the data, that gave me more confidence to be able to say, "Do this and don't do that." So as time went on, I've been changing the protocol. Right now, the protocol version 3, it's been out since, I don't know, I think last summer. Um, and I might make a new protocol just asking people to start at a lower dose and to be more flexible, because there's too many people that look at some protocols they find online and they say, okay, I have to do this. And no, there's no pure science. And also nicotine affects people very differently.
Hmm.
Is And it's the closest I think is like with LDN, low dose naltrexone, and that people have to start at very low doses and then slowly build up, and then they'll go through adjustment periods of how, where they're not sure if the dose is too high, or if they're going through a Herx reaction or not. So they have to just kind of constantly uh, adjust and be flexible with the protocol.
Hmm.
So, but I haven't figured out a way to transmit that idea um, in a new protocol yet, because it's very difficult to transmit
For sure.
in a way that brain fog people will understand.
But just as a general, because obviously, like you said, we need to adjust it. Nicotine definitely affects people differently. So, like for me, for
Mm,
example, when I first tried it, I think I had a 7 milligram patch maybe, and I felt really sick.
mm,
I felt quite ill. And then a lower dose, I felt completely fine.
yeah.
In terms of the general protocol, again, it needs to be tweaked a little bit depending on the individual. But how does the general protocol look in terms of like dosage and the number of
Mm,
days slash weeks slash months that people are typically doing when they're taking part in the protocol as
mm.
a general sort of ballpark guide?
Typical is so difficult because this disease is affecting people so differently,
Yeah.
and nicotine affects people so differently, and the dose they need is, it's so varied. So the only thing that seems to be clear from the data is that the best dose seems to be somewhere between 3.5 and 10.5 milligrams. So that's like the best dose that people kind of end up with.
Yeah.
But to get there, they start with 3.5 milligrams for a few days, then they go on to 7 milligrams for a few days, for a week or whatever, and then they go back down to 3.5 milligrams, and then take a break, and then see what's going on with their body. Because there's also a lot of things that seem to happen to people while they're on the nicotine patch, but then when they stop, they realize that there was even more things happening, because we just get so adapted to
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
whatever is in our environment so fast that we don't even notice some of the changes. But now, like in the new protocol, I would suggest people to start on 1 milligram at
Hmm.
first, because there are some people who, even at 3.5 milligrams, it was too much for them, and they actually started going backwards from 3.5 milligrams down to 0.875 milligrams or whatever per day, and that's like their dose, and that they feel, fantastic, or sometimes even cured on that low of a dose. But then there are other people who feel nothing at 14 milligrams. They don't feel any side effects, nothing, and then they have to go up to 21 milligrams before they start seeing benefits, which is because of genetics. People absorb uh, nicotine very differently.
And how long? Or is it a case of it's quite random in terms of some people start to feel better after a few days, some people it's weeks,
Mm.
sometimes it's months. Again, is that kind of a personal sort of
Yeah, I
process?
think there's some different groups. There's
Hmm.
different types of responses. Um, as I said before, like in the beginning, most people will notice benefit the first couple of days. If their dose is too high, they might notice side effects like nausea, which is a typical side effect of nicotine patches.
Hmm.
But then they might go through a Herx period or not. They might just feel better while they're on it. And then they'll kind of try different doses, higher doses, lower doses. It's not always clear if they should be going up in dose or down in dose. In general, if the side effects are too strong, you go down in dose.
Yeah.
If you're not noticing anything, then you go up in dose.
Hmm.
So there are some people who just feel fantastic on the patch, and they're just like, "That's it. I'm not stopping the patch." I think that's especially people with ADHD and other neurodiverse people. When they start the patch, it's like it's the best ADHD drug they've ever had. So that on top of the other effects is so beneficial for them. They're just like, well, I'm not going to stop, and they're just
Amazing.
I'm going to take this for the rest of my life. Like, okay, fine. And then there are some other people who will take it for a week and then take a break. And then after a while, they'll notice that the benefits are waning, so they'll start it again.
Hmm.
And they'll kind of go back and forth on different rounds and different lengths of break between the rounds until they eventually get to a point where they're just like, they stop and they don't notice any loss of benefit,
Hmm.
or they actually feel better. Um, they're, I think it's very typical. Like when people start vitamins and stuff, when you first start a vitamin or any type of treatment, at the beginning, if you're getting a benefit, you're like, oh, I'm going to keep taking this vitamin forever. Whereas maybe if you're taking a B2 vitamin or B7 vitamin or whatever you're taking, and it's benefiting you for the first 3 days, maybe it's just because you had a deficiency in that, and that's once you've covered that deficiency, you're fine. You don't need to keep taking it every day, or maybe taking it once a week or something would be enough. So
Okay.
the same thing happens with nicotine. I think is people will start taking it, they've seen the benefits, and they're like, "Well, I don't want to rock the boat and make any changes." But then there are a few reports of people that because of having to go to surgery or for other treatments or whatever, they stop the nicotine patch, and then after 3 weeks, which is how much time it takes the cholinergic system to completely rebalance after nicotine. After 3 weeks, then they feel fantastic, even better than when they were on nicotine. So um, when people get to that certain point where they feel like they're not benefiting anymore, mm, and everything, I usually tell people to try to kind of very gradually lower the dose, take choline to maybe help the body adapt to the shift in the loss of nicotine, and then wait 3 weeks and see what's happening. Um, it's very frustrating because there was at the very beginning some girl on YouTube tried the nicotine patches, and she had the most typical reactions. She was like, "Oh, this is great," and then she stopped taking it, and then after 2 weeks, she was like, "I'm cured." But but then she supposedly was taking some type of some $400 vitamins or something that she
Hmm.
was hawking. It was like, okay, I don't think it was the $400 vitamins. I think it's
Maybe the nicotine.
I think it's more than nicotine
Yeah, yeah.
that they're
Okay, so
talking.
I'd like to come to the results that we've talked about
Yeah.
beforehand in a second, but just I also wanted to go over safety
Mm-hmm.
and potential concerns as well quickly beforehand, because I mean obviously none of this is medical advice. It's information we put up just for sake of the viewers
Yeah.
that they can see and do what they want with. But I know you mentioned obviously that certain people there's some kind of with ADHD feel improved,
Yeah.
and then also you're talking about people taking it for a longer term, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are there any potential problems with taking nicotine for a longer time period? And
Mm-hmm.
also, is there any evidence and much research out there around nicotine for ADHD and conditions like that? Because obviously there's different ADHD medications.
Yeah.
is nicotine one that's being looked at for that, or is there research that's already been done?
I don't know very much about the research on ADHD. I know that there is research into nicotine for ADHD, and I know that it's very common in certain circles of people to use nicotine patches. A lot of people have come to me and said, "Oh yeah, well I've used nicotine for 20 years for ADHD or whatever." So it's something it's not new. I mean, there's also lots of research on there's research on Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease and uh, irritable bowel syndrome, etc. There's one type of irritable bowel syndrome that if those people stop smoking, they start getting ulcers and they could die. So the doctors put them on nicotine patches, and that's basically what's kind of keeping them alive from bleeding to death
Mm.
from ulcers. So I mean, there are various other scientific things that are research is going on into nicotine as
Okay,
well.
but in terms of like long term
Yeah,
effects for if you were to, because
yeah,
a lot of people will be watching that and maybe they'll be thinking about the nicotine patches, but there'll be some
hmm
kind of concern around, okay, maybe
yeah.
I would give this a go, but I am a bit concerned about putting on a patch or a nicotine patch for 3 days or 3 weeks or a month or whatever. Like, is there some
Mhm.
kind of concerns that people need to be aware of, some longer term issues, or is it largely just the sort of immediate side effects that can be mitigated by lowering the doses, etc.?
Long-term issues in the research, there's nothing. The only thing long-term of that's like of value that I find that it's not anecdotal from people is the NHS put out something saying that up to 5 years of use of the nicotine patch, there's no health issues with nicotine, and it's from a paper from the NHS addressing that topic. But um, I don't I don't think there's any good research of like people using just nicotine for 20 years and comparing that to other groups. Proper research. One thing that Dr. Litsky brought up is the fact that nicotine affects the the blood flow in the body. Uh, one big problem is that people think that nicotine is a vasoconstrictor, but it's not. It's a vasodilator. So um, that's one problem. And the other thing is that when you don't have blood flow to a certain area, then your body creates new um, like capillaries to get to different parts of the body to bring blood flow. So if you have microclots or whatever from long COVID or ME/CFS, then one of the benefits might be that it's um, that the nicotine is helping the angiogenesis of blood flow getting to different parts of the body. But almost everything in medicine, there is a good side and a downside. So if the nicotine is helping your body get blood flow to the different extremities and stuff, then it's also helping tumors
Mm.
grow as well. So if you had an existing tumor and then you're using nicotine long term, then it might be increasing the blood flow to the tumor, which would be bad for that tumor. But that's like a secondary, you
Yeah.
know,
So again, it's a
downstream
case of
effect.
knowing your body, right, and knowing
Hmm
knowing your your response to it as well, and then on a shorter time scale, one has
hmm
to be aware of the feeling sick and feeling nauseous is like the most common symptoms in it with nicotine if you
Yeah,
exceed the dose too quickly and you take, I mean, I think it's quite a common thing. If you just go super
mhm.
high straight away, you're likely to
Yeah,
feel a little bit ill.
yeah. And insomnia is one of the early problems as well. In the beginning, if people are too high of a dose, then that can cause sleep issues. A lot of people report nightmares, um, but I think the nightmares has to do with the way that nicotine affects the brain. That people have sleep cycles, and you go through like deep sleep and REM sleep, and you're kind of going through these 90-minute cycles. And usually the REM sleep is right at the end of the cycle. And if something happens right at that end of the cycle, then you'll wake up feeling refreshed
Mm.
because you're waking up at the right time, but also you'll wake up remembering uh, what you were dreaming right before as well.
Hmm.
So nicotine, especially in the beginning, seems to affect the sleep cycles in a way that um, some people will have more nightmares. Some people, if they have too high of a dose, they'll have problems with insomnia. People that have sleep issues, I tell them just take off the patch before going to bed. Some people will wear the patch for only 12 hours a day to make sure that it doesn't affect their sleep at all. Me personally, I didn't wear the patch at night for the first 2 or 3 rounds because I was worried about sleep. Because for me, sleep is the most important for healing. This is
Hmm.
the main thing I track for my health is sleep,
Yeah.
and deep sleep and REM sleep and that. So, um, so I was worried about that. But then after the third or fourth round, I started wearing the patch 24 hours, and it didn't cause any problems.
Hmm.
Um, and at first, it seemed to wake me up earlier. Like my body would just kind of naturally wake up at the right time, and I would sleep 7 hours and feel like I'd slept 8.5 hours. And but over time, using it more, because it seems to activate more the parasympathetic system, I'm actually sleeping more now than I used to sleep.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I'm sleeping more like 8.5 hours instead of 7 or 7.5 hours. So
That's always a nice thing.
yeah, it's nice, but also at the same time, when you want to do stuff, you want to get up
Yeah.
and do
Yeah.
stuff. So
For sure.
um, I don't know. So I don't know. That. It's not just the nicotine because I'm also taking other medications
Okay.
that affect me. But
So I'd love to get onto the to your experience to round things off, but I
mhm,
think it would be good if we could quickly go over some of the results then that you
mhm,
guys have been seeing from the test. Sorry, I just
yeah.
had a call come through. So yeah, I think if we can go over some of the results that you guys have been seeing, because obviously you've been
Mhm,
centralizing this data and congregating it, maybe you give us a
mhm,
little bit of an insight into some of the general results that you have been
mhm,
seeing from people who have been taking part in the test. So
yeah.
an indication of what percentage of people are having some kind of improvements with it, whether
Mhm,
there's any kind of crossover with who improves based on their phenotype and the type of symptoms
mhm,
that they're having, and also maybe an indication of the types of symptoms specifically that are being most
mhm.
affected by the nicotine.
So the data that we have now is from 231 people, but it's still being analyzed and to hopefully be published. Hopefully, we'll see. And but I have data from the first 148 people that I published in a long COVID conference last December, so I can show you that data. But in general, about 70, more than 70% of people that tried nicotine were responders and that they had some type of benefit from it. And then non-responders were about 20% that they tried the nicotine, they didn't notice really anything. Um, my opinion is that those people needed to try it longer, especially in the beginning. They were just trying it for a week or 2 weeks or a month. But now I think people need to try it for at least 6 weeks before they give up on it. Like if they're not noticing anything, they should try it for at least 6 weeks, 2 months to really see if it's doing something or not. And then in the beginning, we had 5% of the people that felt worse on the nicotine patch. And I think a lot of that had to do with the problems I mentioned before of people trying too high of a dose,
Mm.
etc. There are people that they would try too high of a dose. They would have like a Herx or Verx reaction, and then they would quit the nicotine, and then they would stop, and they're stopping like in the middle of the process, and so it was even worse for them. So it's a very delicate balance. But luckily now, since last December, in the data we have, nobody has gotten worse. Like everybody has, recovered within 3 weeks of stopping the nicotine. They've recovered at least to their normal baseline before. As far as symptoms, it varies a lot. Um, the the biggest ones that I find the most difficult, I think, the people with MCAS and POTS,
Mm.
because some people with these symptoms, they'll start taking the nicotine and they feel cured. Like from day one, they're like, oh, I don't have any more POTS. The people will start taking the nicotine and their resting heart rate will drop. Their problems of their heart rate spiking when they would stand up would just disappear. I'm like, okay, great. So, I mean, I
Happy
think that
days.
means that their POTS is definitely something very neurological in nature, and getting the balance back into the system just fixes their problem. And then with MCAS as well, because um, some people with MCAS also have uh, issues with nightshade, and nightshade is the family of nicotine. So, with nicotine at the beginning, especially if they're using too high of a dose, then the nicotine will maybe like spike the MCAS at first, so they make the people feel worse with
Hmm.
this kind of MCAS or allergy reactions.
Hmm.
But over time, then it seems to help modulate everything because it's an immune modulator, and so that it seems to, in general, help people. But the worst one was in the last data was with tachycardia.
Hmm.
People who had problems with tachycardia seemed to be the least likely to benefit from nicotine, and
Why do you think
people
that is?
who had just general neurological digestive symptoms, fatigue, uh, like that, those are the ones that seem to benefit the most.
Okay.
No.
Why do you think that is? Is that what's the reasoning behind that? Is that because nicotine is
Hmm.
more aligned to reducing those kind of symptoms, or is it because of the
Hmm.
stimulant nature of it that it can almost make the tachycardia worse?
I think it's probably the fact that they're so dose dependent and people are so different. And luckily, with the Facebook group now, there's more than 10,000 people in the Facebook group just sharing their experiences, all of the positive, the negative,
Hmm.
just like completely sharing everything. And that seems to help a lot because people will have a certain reaction, and then within one day they have 20 other people saying, "Oh yeah, I had that reaction, and this is what I did to to solve it by lowering the dose." Yeah. So what was I saying before? Hmm.
About the tachycardia and
Hmm. Yeah. Tachycardia. Oh well, like the Facebook group
yeah,
is
the
is
Facebook groups. Yeah,
is so helpful because it's so variable,
yeah.
and we're all just guinea pigs. We're testing ourselves, sharing the knowledge to other people, and there seem to be some subgroups, and then those subgroups can like find other people who are have a similar reaction. There's even like a small subgroup of people that when they're on the nicotine patch, they feel horrible.
Hmm.
So they'll wear the patch for a few days and then they'll take it off. But after they take off the patch, they feel better. Their baseline improves. And then after, when they've rested up for a while, they'll put the patch on again for a few days or a week or whatever. And then they'll stop and they'll improve. And they just kind of do that for months and months and months until they're cured. So
It
it's like
doesn't.
completely reverse of like everybody else, but it's hey.
It actually doesn't surprise me though the variety in responses because it's such a heterogeneous condition. We hear people
Yeah,
with all sorts of different symptoms, symptoms that flare up for various apparent reasons. So it doesn't
yeah.
really surprise me. So just to get an understanding and just to clarify the results from that initial study, you had 148, I think it was, people.
Yeah.
You had around about 70% demonstrated some improvement as
Mhm.
tracked from when you followed up with them a few weeks after the protocol,
Well,
right?
this was all retrospective, so they would, after they know how the nicotine's affecting them.
Okay.
So maybe after 2 weeks, after 2 months, or after 6 months, or however long, when they have a feeling that they know how it's benefited them or not, then they go into the survey and they say, well, when I started nicotine, I was at this baseline point at 50% or whatever, and then after I was at 70%.
Okay.
So so it's all from one survey. So it's
Okay.
all retrospective, but it's getting those two time points. But most people pretty much know the difference. They know, like, okay, well, I was bedbound, so I was like at 30%, and now I'm walking 2 kilometers a day, so I'm now at 60%. So
Yeah.
it's subjective, but at the same time, it's very believable data.
Yeah.
And in general, the people who were responders report a 20% increase in baseline.
Okay.
So luckily, some people, it's like the one missing piece of what they needed. So they come out saying, "Oh, nicotine patches cured me," but of course they've done probably 100 other things as well that help them. They worked
Yeah.
on their sleep and pacing and brain training, etc. Um, but that 20% jump in baseline is reason enough for people to try it.
Yeah.
And if
For
you if
sure.
you look at the health rising data as well, a large percentage of those that report, like, would they try it again, like
Hmm.
90 some percent are saying yes, I would definitely try it again. Or I definitely recommend it. So.
That is, it's yeah, it's honestly really great to hear this, these kind of things that start out as, people just trying things at home, and then it finally being centralized and actually some data. And like you said, it's always difficult with these kind of conditions because
Hmm.
we're not measuring like biomarkers specifically, and it's largely kind of subjective. But I think you had mentioned that a lot of the responders had been ill for a long period of time, which
Hmm.
likely might negate the fact that it's just time or things improving them. And it's also, I guess, like you said, for certain people, maybe another tool to add
Hmm.
to the toolkit, or it might be the thing that gets you over that final kind of hurdle, and seems
Yeah.
relatively low risk compared to a lot of the potential treatments out there. Because you got to be careful, I think, with, um, I was back in the day, I was ready to try anything, literally anything. It could have done anything to me, but
Yeah.
I think, yeah, it's good to have, when, because people are desperate and people are trying all sorts of things. So I think it's only a positive thing where these ideas are voiced and there's evidence and a rationale behind why that hypothesis might work, and then
Hmm.
people can read other experiences. They can read the safety profile of the thing that they're trying, in this case nicotine, and then they can make an informed and educated decision for themselves and say, is this worth me giving it a go? What do I need to be careful of? What are other people saying? And then they can make the decision for themselves. And I think that's, you know
Yeah.
the benefit of doing these sort of things.
Yeah.
A final thing, Troy, I just wanted to go over your experience with with nicotine, and your experience
Hmm.
with long COVID, just to wrap things up, so we can have your N of one to leave us with.
Okay. Well, first I wanted to ask you about your experience. Like,
Okay.
what, what you said that it benefited you, but
Yeah.
what type of benefits did you see? And
So I think I can fell into the category where I didn't do it for long enough. But last summer I heard about the test, and I had already made some good progress through a variety of things that I've talked about: the brain retraining, the cold therapy, the pacing. I think hyperbaric oxygen helped a little bit as well.
mm-hmm.
Time, my age, so that was probably like 2.5 years in. I
Mm-hmm.
used the patches for a week or two,
Mm-hmm.
and whilst I was on them, I noticed my energy levels were definitely somewhat better. I felt
Mm-hmm.
consistently a bit more energetic once I got the dosage right, because at first, as I mentioned, I felt quite ill because I tried
Yeah.
7 milligrams, I think, immediately. Um, I wore them for about 10 hours a day or 11
Mm-hmm.
hours a day. So I would get up, put them on, and then wear them till the evening.
Yeah.
And then after coming off, I noticed around that time, I noticed a little jump in my general baseline. So last
Mm.
summer, I noticed a little blip upwards, which I think might have been due to the nicotine. I was also trying quite a few other things like the hyperbaric oxygen at a similar time,
Mm.
and then more recently, over the last 6 months or so, I know it's not the prescribed method, but I've been having nicotine gum every now and again when I've been feeling a bit rough, and
Yeah.
also a nicotine patch if I'm having a crash. But thankfully, I haven't really had a crash for a while, and I
Yeah.
feel like it brings me back a bit.
Mm.
So um, I think it's worth me maybe doing the full test
Yeah.
for a longer period again at some point. But
Okay.
yeah, overall, I felt like the pros outweighed the cons for the
Mm.
nicotine.
Yeah, there's one thing people report is that the patch seems to help with a crash or PEM, but
Yeah,
it's usually better to have the patch on for that hard day to avoid the PEM later than it is to try to dig yourself out of the PEM
yeah,
hole with the patch as well. So I thought I would mention that. Thanks for sharing your experience.
my pleasure.
So my experience is that well, I had long COVID since the beginning of COVID, and I started off like in pretty bad shape,
Hmm.
and then went through the first year trying to get back into shape, and then when I tried to put running back into my routine, then I crashed pretty hard and just barely made it through a semester of work teaching, where 100% of my energy was just to get through work. That was it. I did nothing else. I couldn't do anything else. But and then I kind of slowly tried a bunch of other things that have helped me throughout time. I have a whole like 50-page document with all of the different things I've tried and with the nicotine test and everything. But on my fifth infection with COVID, I was working and I started using the nicotine patch in the middle of the infection, and then I had like some benefits, but I was also still sick as
Yeah.
well, still trying to recover from the COVID. And I had a couple of days when I felt kind of off, maybe nausea, maybe a Herx reaction as well. And then I had one day where I felt like I was on drugs or something. I felt like I was on MDMA. when I've never taken it before, but it's just like I was walking around thinking, oh, I just feel so light, and
Yeah.
all of the fatigue had just kind of fallen away. Like a lot of people say the same thing on their comments. They're just like, oh, like this weight has been lifted off of my back, and I could just see very clearly, kind of more of the MECFS symptoms kind of disappearing, and then I could see clearly that I still had certain symptoms left over from COVID, like they affected my lungs and muscles and different parts of the body and some brain damage as well, I'm sure. Um, so at that time, I was just like, "Wow, this is amazing," and that's when I realized the whole pendulum uh, idea, because
Hmm.
for that day and a half, I was just like, "Oh my gosh, I couldn't stop. I just had so much energy, mental energy, and just like I couldn't go fast enough. Like
Hmm.
my fingers couldn't move fast enough to type, or and it was just fantastic. But then afterwards, it kind of swung back, because it's like because your body is compensating for being sick, and then all of a sudden you're not sick anymore, but your body's still compensating.
Yeah.
So that's why you get this huge rush for a while. It was for some people maybe lasts for a couple hours, for a day, and I think about 25 or 30% of people report a similar thing with nicotine of going through this of day of like of complete remission or just feeling even better than healthy
Hmm.
for a day or two. That's a typical response. But then it kind of swings back, and just kind of slowly recovering from being sick with COVID again, and trying with the patches and setting up all of this research and everything, and slowly getting better. But the thing is, I was already at about 80%.
Mm.
My lowest point was about 30%. So I was already at about like 80% of recovery when I started with the nicotine patches. So now maybe I'm at about 90%. But the biggest thing is I don't have that feeling of constantly need to like count spoons, or
Yeah.
when you're walking around, it's like, oh, I'll do that later. Now it's just, oh, that's dirty, I'll clean that.
Yeah.
I don't even have to think of it anymore.
Hmm.
You realize how much energy you lose counting spoons.
Hmm. Hmm.
which is which is uh, which is also another, like, an added benefit as well.
Very freeing to just be able to do what you please,
Yeah.
and I guess what you please is doing all of this research and putting
Mm.
all this stuff together. So I firstly just can't thank you enough for the work that you're doing, Troy, and also for your time today. It's really been super great to chat and to hear a little bit more. For the viewers who are watching, is there
Mhm.
any links that I should add in the description that I can point people towards to learn a little bit more about the work that you're doing, the hypothesis, the
Mhm.
protocol, all of that?
Well,
Is
I
there
have
anything that I should
a
leave in the bio?
yeah, I have a link tree that you can put into the bio, and
Amazing.
I suggest people to read through as much as they can before they start, because a lot of people just start too fast, and
Yeah.
take advantage of all of this collected knowledge from thousands of people coming before you, and learn from their mistakes. And then also join the Facebook group, because you can just search the Facebook group and search for uh, dizziness or whatever medication, or to look for interactions, and so you can find other people who are similar to you
Hmm.
as well, and get support throughout your journey as well. Twitter is not so good for that.
No.
Twitter Twitter is not so good for support. It's only good for sharing science and data, but other than that,
It could be an
useless.
ominous place, can't it? I think
Yeah.
amazing. Well, I will add those links in the description. And again, just for as a disclaimer, it's not medical advice for anyone watching. But I hope that it was very useful, and I hope that you guys took something from it, and you can delve into the nicotine test a little bit more. But yeah, Troy, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an
Okay.
absolute pleasure.
Well, nice to talk to you today. Bye.